The wind that afternoon carried the taste of iron and dust. Across the outskirts of Gallup, New Mexico, the air shimmered under the sinking sun, stretching the long shadows of broken fences and rusted rail lines. The desert, dry and brittle from months without rain, held the kind of silence that hums louder than noise. Captain Daniel Hayes tightened his grip on the Jeep's steering wheel as it bumped along the cracked road. Behind him rode Corporal Marcus Reed and Lieutenant Avery Holt, their faces weathered from years of sun and duty. The fourth member of their patrol, a German shepherd named Shadow, stood in the back, ears pricked, nose tilted toward the wind. It was supposed to be another uneventful sweep of the abandoned industrial district, a place the military still checked occasionally after an old munitions plant explosion months before. The factory ruins sat quiet now, stripped bare by looters and sand, the kind of place even the wind seemed to forget. But not Shadow. Without warning, the dog's body stiffened. His tail rose, ears pivoting forward. Then came the low growl, soft, urgent, unlike any command-trained alert they'd heard before. Daniel slowed the Jeep. "You smell something, boy?" Shadow didn't answer, of course. He leapt off the vehicle before it had fully stopped, paws hitting the dust, heading straight toward the collapsed building, half covered in ivy and soot. Marcus cursed under his breath. "What's he doing? We haven't cleared that structure." Daniel was already stepping out. "Let him lead." The men followed the shepherd across the gravel. The factory's metal skeleton loomed ahead, twisted and half swallowed by sand. Every footstep crunched like bone under their boots. Through a gap in the wall, a faint smell drifted, something burnt, something human. Shadow slipped inside, moving through the dimness with a soldier's precision. His nails tapped against the cracked concrete as he navigated fallen beams and shattered glass. The men followed, rifles lowered but ready, breaths shallow in the thick, musty air. "Clear left," Marcus murmured. Avery swept his light across a line of broken furnaces. Nothing, only ash and rust. Then Shadow stopped. He stood near a pile of rubble where sunlight filtered through a hole in the roof. Dust floated in the beam like slow-moving snow. The dog's tail stiffened. He gave a small whine. Daniel approached carefully, eyes narrowing. At first he thought it was debris, an old tarp maybe, or a pile of rags. But when he crouched closer, the shape shifted. A small hand. He froze. "Marcus," he said quietly, "get over here." They brushed away fragments of plaster and wire. Beneath the gray dust lay a little girl no older than 7, barefoot. Her skin smudged black, her hair tangled with soot. A tattered teddy bear was clutched tightly against her chest. She didn't move. For a moment, Daniel thought she might already be gone. Then her fingers twitched. Her eyes opened, pale gray, unfocused, staring straight through him. They didn't react to light. They didn't see. "Jesus," Avery whispered. "She's blind." The girl said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. She simply lay still, her small frame trembling only slightly with each shallow breath. Shadow, gentle as if sensing the fragility of the moment, lowered himself to the floor beside her. He didn't bark or whine, just lay there, pressing his flank near enough for her to feel his warmth. The girl's hand, weak and shaking, reached out and touched his fur. Her lips parted. "Dog," she whispered, barely a breath. Daniel's throat tightened. That single word carried everything: fear, hope, life. "Hey there, sweetheart," he murmured, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." He unzipped his field jacket and wrapped it around her, careful not to pry the teddy bear from her arms. When he lifted her, she was frighteningly light, bones and dust and silence. Her head fell against his shoulder like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to carry her. Shadow rose, following close as they left the ruins. The sunlight outside was brutal after the darkness inside. For the first time, Daniel noticed how empty the horizon felt, how far from help they were. At the Jeep, he set her gently in the back seat, laying his jacket over her like a blanket. Shadow climbed in beside her, curling his body protectively along her legs. The girl didn't resist. She simply turned her face toward the dog's chest, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. Marcus leaned on the doorframe, voice low. "Where do you think she came from?" "No idea," Daniel replied. "There's no settlement for miles. Maybe she wandered here after the blast." "Or was left," Avery added softly. None of them spoke after that. The jeep rumbled down the road, kicking up clouds of red dust behind them. The girl didn't cry. She didn't sleep either. She just held the teddy bear tight, fingers gripping its frayed ear, while Shadow's tail brushed lightly against her side in quiet reassurance. As they neared the base, the sun slipped behind the mesas, washing the desert in gold. Daniel looked back once more. The girl's face was turned toward the dying light, her eyes still open but seeing nothing. He whispered to himself. She wasn't supposed to survive, but she had. And deep inside, Daniel knew whatever force had kept this child alive in those ashes had tied her fate to theirs for a reason. When they reached the outpost, the sky was the color of smoke. The men carried her into the medical tent, but she clung to Shadow's fur, refusing to let go even for examination. The dog stayed by her side, silent, steady eyes locked on anyone who came too close. Hours later, after the doctor confirmed she was stable but blind, Daniel stood outside under the cold desert stars. The wind had shifted north, cooler now, carrying the faint smell of sage. Inside, through the thin canvas wall, he could hear Shadow's soft breathing and the girl's tiny voice murmuring something he couldn't make out, perhaps just a dream. He looked up at the night sky. The Milky Way stretched wide above the quiet land, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel Hayes felt something stir inside him that the war had nearly erased. Hope. The following days drifted by like a slow-moving current. Inside the temporary desert outpost, the rhythm of duty carried on, radios crackling, boots echoing against the concrete floor, coffee steaming in metal mugs before dawn. But for Daniel Hayes, time had begun to move differently, bending around the small figure that now occupied one corner of the infirmary. The girl had not spoken much since that first day. She sat quietly on the narrow cot, her bare feet tucked beneath her, clutching the worn teddy bear and listening, always listening. Her name they'd learned from a faint tag sewn into her jacket, Lena Turner. Her eyes were a pale gray blue, clouded over like smoke trapped behind glass. When she turned toward a sound, it was never exact. Her gaze slid just past the speaker as though she was searching for light that wasn't there. But shadow she could find every time. The dog rarely left her side. Wherever she went, from cot to doorway, from tent to the small table where Clara the medic tried to feed her soup, he followed, silent as a shadow should be. When Lena walked, he brushed against her leg, letting her hand rest gently along his neck. When she hesitated at a step or uneven ground, he pressed closer, guiding her forward with a patience no command had ever taught him. "Never seen anything like it," Marcus murmured one evening, watching from the mess tent doorway. "Dog acts like he's been trained for this his whole life." Daniel, stirring his coffee, didn't look up. Maybe he was. Marcus smiled faintly. "You think he knows she can't see?" "I think he knows more than most people do." Outside, the New Mexico night stretched vast and blue, broken only by the far-off hum of desert wind. The camp generator clicked softly in rhythm. Somewhere beyond the wire fence, a coyote called a long, lonely sound that seemed to fade into the stars. Inside, Shadow lifted his head at the noise but didn't move. Lena's small hand tightened in his fur. "You're safe," Daniel said softly from the doorway. She didn't answer, only nodded once. Her world had shrunk to a circle no larger than Shadow's presence and the warmth of the cot. The men respected it. They didn't push her to talk or move. Sometimes healing, Daniel knew, required silence. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what horrors those clouded eyes had seen before they lost their sight. Each morning began the same way. Clara Reed, Marcus's sister, and the camp nurse would come early to check Lena's condition. She'd speak in a calm, even tone, never too loud, always careful. "Good morning, honey. How are your eyes feeling today?" "Hurts a little," Lena would whisper. "That's okay," Clara would reply. "That means they're trying to heal." The medic had said the blindness might not be permanent. The blast dust and heat could have damaged her corneas, but with care there was a chance of recovery. It was a fragile hope, but it was something to hold on to. Between checkups, Daniel often found himself sitting nearby, notebook in hand, pretending to write reports. In truth, he was just watching. Watching how the little girl tilted her head to catch the faintest sound. How she smiled barely when Shadow exhaled against her arm. how she flinched whenever a door slammed too loudly, then calmed only when she felt the dog's steady heartbeat under her palm. He'd seen men come back from war broken and hollow. He recognized that same emptiness in her, the way she floated through each moment without anchoring to it. Except with Shadow. That bond, it wasn't something made by training or circumstance. It was something older, purer, the kind of connection that didn't need words or sight. One afternoon, Daniel entered the infirmary with a bowl of warm broth. Lena sat on the floor, cross-legged, facing the soft hum of the generator. The late sunlight painted the canvas walls in streaks of amber. "Hey there," he said gently. "Brought you something warm." She didn't move. Shadow shifted, glancing up at him, then back to her. Daniel waited, holding the bowl a few inches from her hands. "It's okay," he said. "Just soup, chicken noodle." Finally, she turned her head slightly toward the sound of his voice. Her eyes, though unseeing, seemed to search his face. Then, almost imperceptibly, she reached forward, not for the bowl, but to touch Shadow's ear. The dog stayed perfectly still. "Is it good?" she asked softly, almost to him. Daniel smiled. "It's good. You want to try?" She shook her head. "Not hungry." "All right," he said, setting the bowl down. "It'll be here if you change your mind." As he stood to leave, she spoke again so quietly he almost missed it. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, caught by the weight in her small voice, the kind of question only someone who had been abandoned too long would ask. "Because someone helped me once," he said simply. "And I never forgot." She didn't reply, but her hand slid down Shadow's back, finding comfort in the familiar texture of his fur. For Daniel, that was enough. That night, Daniel sat outside under the open sky. The desert stretched endlessly before him, a landscape both harsh and holy. The stars burned bright, scattered across the heavens like embers. The air was cool now, smelling faintly of sagebrush and dust. Marcus joined him, settling down on an overturned crate. "You ever think maybe we weren't supposed to find her?" he asked. Daniel tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Just seems like fate's got a strange way of putting people where they need to be." Daniel took a slow breath. "Yeah, it does." They sat in silence, two soldiers who had seen too much, listening to the hum of a distant engine and the far-off howl of wind through the arroyos. Inside the infirmary, Shadow slept at Lena's feet. The girl's breathing, slow and steady, blended with his in perfect rhythm. The sound was small but profound, the kind of peace that didn't come from orders or victories, but from the quiet certainty that something broken had begun to mend. As the night deepened, Daniel's thoughts wandered back to a promise made years ago under another sky, to a man whose laughter still echoed in his dreams. Cody Turner, his teammate, his brother, the one who'd pulled him from a burning vehicle outside Raqqa and who never made it home. Daniel closed his eyes. The desert wind brushed his face, carrying the faint scent of smoke, and with it came a whisper of memory. "If anything ever happens, promise me you'll watch over my girls." He opened his eyes again, looking toward the tent where Lena slept beside Shadow. "I will," he murmured. "I already am." Inside, the little girl stirred in her sleep, one hand tangled in the shepherd's fur. The dog lifted his head briefly, then lowered it again, sighing into the night. For the first time since the ruins, Lena dreamed not of darkness, not of fire, but of warmth, of footsteps beside hers, of a world she couldn't yet see, but somehow already trusted. And somewhere beyond the walls of that quiet outpost under the vast desert sky, a small flame of hope began to burn, gentle, steady, waiting for its time to shine. The desert had settled into its late spring rhythm, the kind of dry heat that hummed through every metal surface, and the kind of silence that stretched for miles. The outpost lay still beneath the pale sky, its canvas tents breathing softly in the wind. Inside the infirmary, Lena was asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her small hand still clutched the same threadbare teddy bear, its fur once brown, now the color of dust and ash. The seams along its arms were frayed, the left ear torn halfway through. No matter what Clara tried, gentle cleaning, soft stitching, Lena refused to let anyone take it. The bear had become her anchor in a world she couldn't see. Shadow lay curled beside her cot, his breathing deep and even. The sound was steady, like a metronome for her dreams. Daniel Hayes sat a few feet away, elbows on his knees, watching the girl in the half-light. The hum of the generator pulsed faintly through the floor. He'd stayed awake most of the night again, paperwork half-finished, coffee gone cold. It wasn't duty that kept him up. It was the feeling that he was missing something right in front of him. The girl's survival had defied every rule of logic. A 7-year-old child alone, blind, trapped in the ruins of a collapsed factory, yet alive when they found her. The doctor said it was a miracle. Daniel didn't use that word easily, but this time he couldn't argue. Shadow stirred in his sleep. The tip of his tail brushed against the teddy bear. Lena shifted, murmuring softly. Her hand relaxed, and for the first time in days the bear slipped a few inches away from her grasp. Daniel hesitated. Then he picked it up gently. It was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. He turned it over in his hands, studying the faded fabric under the dim lamp. It smelled faintly of smoke and something else, something old and familiar. He couldn't place it. The bear's left ear was nearly detached, a small tear revealing the stuffing inside. That's when he noticed it, a thin line of pink thread buried beneath layers of grime. The color was barely visible, like a memory trying to surface. He frowned. What the hell? Shadow opened his eyes, watching him closely. Daniel leaned toward the lantern, bringing the bear closer to the light. Beneath the dirt and soot, tiny letters began to appear, uneven, hand-stitched but unmistakable. He rubbed the surface gently with a damp cloth, careful not to damage the old stitching. Words emerged, faint but legible. For Lena, always Dad. The room seemed to stop breathing. Daniel stared at the words until they blurred. Lena. Her name wasn't just something they guessed. It was written here, sewn into the fabric of her only belonging. He sat back slowly, the bear resting on his lap, his heart beating a little too fast. Jesus, he whispered. Shadow tilted his head as if asking what he'd found. Daniel looked at the dog. You knew, didn't you? He said quietly. You've been trying to tell me. He remembered now the first night when Shadow had pawed at the bear again and again, whining softly. He hadn't been playing. He'd been pointing. For a long moment Daniel couldn't move. The past had suddenly found its way into the present, cutting through the desert air like a blade of sunlight. The name, the stitching, the word Dad. And then memory crashed through him like thunder. He was back in Syria. A convoy ambushed, smoke rising from a burnt Humvee, a man's voice calling out through the chaos. Go Hayes, get clear! Daniel had turned, coughing, vision blurred by sand and fire. A figure ran toward him, big, broad, fearless, dragging him out of the blast zone before the second detonation hit. The world went white. When the dust cleared, Daniel was alive. The other man was not. Sergeant Cody Turner. He remembered the photo Cody kept tucked inside his helmet, a woman holding a baby, sunlight spilling over their faces. He'd shown it to everyone, proud as a man could be. My girls, he'd said. My wife Anna and my little Lena. Daniel had laughed back then. She's beautiful, man. You're gonna spoil her. Cody's grin was the kind that lit up a whole unit. That's the plan. And later, during quieter nights, Cody had said something Daniel could never forget. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll check on them. Just make sure they're okay. Daniel had promised, of course, the kind of promise soldiers make all the time, never believing they'll have to keep it. Now, years later, in a forgotten desert outpost, holding a burned teddy bear in his hands, Daniel realized fate had brought that promise full circle. He stood up, gripping the bear like something holy, and stepped outside into the night. The sky above Gallup was deep and endless, a black canvas streaked with stars. The air carried the smell of sage and dust, the same scent he'd learned to associate with both peace and ghosts. Marcus was sitting by the fire pit, cleaning his rifle. He looked up when Daniel approached. You look like you've seen one, Marcus said. A ghost, I mean. Daniel handed him the teddy bear. Read this. Marcus squinted under the lantern light, tracing the stitches with his finger. Then his expression changed: confusion, recognition, disbelief. For Lena, always Dad. He looked up. You think... Daniel nodded. Cody Turner. Marcus blinked hard. No way. Cody's gone. I know. 3 years now. He paused. But this is his little girl. For a long while Marcus said nothing. The only sound was the soft crackle of fire and the distant howl of wind. Finally he spoke. Holy hell, Danny. That man saved your life. Yeah, Daniel said quietly. And I made him a promise I never kept. Until now. Later that night, Daniel found himself sitting beside Lena's cot again. She stirred as he entered, half asleep, clutching for Shadow's fur. The dog lifted his head, alert but calm. Daniel knelt down, the teddy bear resting between his hands. Hey, sweetheart, he whispered. I found something of yours. She turned her head toward his voice. What is it? It's your bear, he said. But there's something special on it. Something your dad left you. She frowned faintly. My dad? Daniel's voice softened. He must have loved you very much. He stitched your name on it. Said, for Lena, always Dad. Her lips parted. For a moment the air in the tent felt suspended. Then in a trembling whisper she said, I remember his voice. Daniel swallowed hard. You do? She nodded slowly, her blind eyes filling with tears. He sang to me. Before the loud noise. She turned her face toward Shadow. The dog pressed closer, resting his head on her lap. Is he gone? She asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then said the only truth that mattered. He's watching over you, sweetheart, just like I am. She didn't answer. She just nodded, holding the bear tightly to her chest. And though her eyes could not see, a small, peaceful smile crossed her lips. Outside, the night deepened. Marcus leaned against the tent pole, arms crossed, staring at the horizon. Avery, who had been silent most of the evening, finally said what they were all thinking. So what now? Daniel exhaled. Now we find the rest of her family. Cody's folks. They deserve to know. And the girl. Daniel looked back toward the tent where a little girl and a dog slept side by side, breathing in perfect time. She stays with us, he said, until she's home. The wind rose, carrying a thin veil of desert sand across the firelight. In it, Daniel thought he could almost hear Cody's voice again, faint, steady, grateful. You kept your promise, brother. And for the first time since the war, Daniel Hayes let himself believe it. The morning sun rose over the high desert in a haze of soft gold, turning the ridges near Gallup into waves of amber and rust. Wind brushed over the tents, carrying the smell of coffee, dry earth, and sage. The outpost was quiet that day, but Daniel Hayes felt anything but calm. He stood outside the command trailer, holding the teddy bear in his hand, staring at the stitched words that had changed everything. For Lena, always Dad. The stitching wasn't just a message. It was a bridge connecting a promise made in another lifetime to this fragile moment in the desert. Somewhere out there, Cody Turner's parents were still alive, and they deserved to know their granddaughter had survived. But knowing the truth meant something harder. Daniel would have to let her go. Inside the infirmary, Lena sat at the small metal table Clara had set up for her. The morning light came through the tent flap, painting a soft white glow across the floor. She couldn't see it, but she felt its warmth on her face. Her hands moved carefully over the surface of a tin cup filled with oatmeal, her fingers tracing its rim before she took a spoonful. Shadow lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half open. Every time she moved, his tail gave a slow, reassuring thump. Good morning, sweetheart, Clara said softly as she entered. How are the eyes feeling today? They burn sometimes, Lena whispered. That's okay. Healing takes time. Daniel stepped in his boots, scuffing lightly against the floor. Lena's head turned toward the sound. Hi, she said shyly. Hi, kiddo. He smiled, though she couldn't see it. How's Shadow treating you? She reached down and brushed her fingers through the shepherd's thick coat. He's my eyes. Claire exchanged a glance with Daniel, one of those quiet, wordless looks adults share when something sacred has just been spoken. Then she slipped out, giving them space. Daniel crouched beside Lena's chair. Hey, Lena, can I ask you something? She tilted her head slightly. Okay. Do you remember your family? Anyone from before all this? Her brows drew together. A voice, she said after a long pause. Deep. He used to hum when I couldn't sleep. Mama would laugh and say he was tone deaf. Daniel smiled faintly. That sounds like your dad. She nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting just a little. He smelled like soap and smoke, and he called me his little sparrow. Her voice trembled on that last word. Daniel's throat tightened. He reached out and laid a gentle hand over hers. Your daddy was a brave man, Lena. He saved a lot of people. Was he a soldier? Yes, Daniel said softly. A good one. Her hand trembled in his. Is he gone? He hesitated. The truth was a delicate thing, sharp enough to wound but necessary to heal. He's not here anymore, he said gently. But he's still watching over you. I think he sent us to find you. She nodded, small and solemn. Shadow found me, she whispered. So maybe God sent the dog first. Daniel let out a slow breath, smiling through the ache. Maybe he did. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat at the communications desk, a battered laptop open before him. The air hummed with static as he connected through the military archives, searching every record he could find. Turner Cody, U.S. Marines. The database loaded slowly, one blinking file after another. When the name finally appeared, Daniel leaned closer. Sergeant Cody J. Turner, KIA, Raqqa, Syria. Survived by wife Anna Turner, deceased 2020. Next of kin, Walter and June Turner, Taos, New Mexico. He stared at the screen for a long time. Got something? Marcus asked, stepping in with a cup of coffee. Daniel nodded. His parents. They're still alive. Marcus let out a low whistle. You gonna call? Daniel hesitated, then closed the laptop. Not yet. Marcus frowned. You're stalling. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. She's barely holding on, Marcus. Every time someone new walks into that tent, she clings to Shadow like the world's about to disappear again. If I tell her we're sending her away, Marcus cut in softly, you'll break her heart. Daniel nodded. Yeah. Marcus sipped his coffee, studying his friend. You always had a problem with letting go, Dan. Not this time, Daniel said. Not after what that man did for me. I owe him this much. Marcus set his cup down. Then let's do it right. The next morning, Daniel placed a call through the base's radio link. It took nearly an hour to reach the local sheriff's department near Taos. The deputy on duty promised to deliver a message to Walter and June Turner, though he warned they hadn't been seen in town for months. When the return call finally came 2 days later, Daniel was sitting by the Jeep watching the sunset burn over the horizon. The voice on the other end was thin, shaky, an older man with grief stitched into every syllable. This is Walter Turner, he said. You found my granddaughter. Daniel swallowed. Yes, sir. We did. Her name is Lena. She's safe. A pause. Then a choked breath. Safe. Lord above. There was another voice in the background, a woman's. Who is it, Walter? Walter's tone broke. It's her. June, it's Lena. She's alive. Daniel could hear June's sobs through the static. Tell her we've been praying. Every night. Tell her we never stopped. Daniel's voice grew quiet. I will, ma'am. When can we see her? Walter asked. Soon, Daniel said. We'll make the trip to Taos as soon as she's strong enough. That night, Daniel stood outside Lena's tent, unsure how to tell her. Shadow lifted his head when Daniel stepped in, amber eyes reflecting the lamplight. Lena sat on her cot, humming softly to herself, a melody without words. Just comfort. Hey, kiddo, Daniel said. Hi. She smiled faintly. You sound happy. He chuckled softly. Do I? You do. He sat down beside her cot. I talked to someone today. Some people, actually. Her fingers paused mid-stroke on Shadow's fur. Who? Your grandparents, Daniel said. Your dad's mom and dad. They're alive. They've been looking for you. Lena froze. For a heartbeat, the tent was silent except for the sound of Shadow's slow breathing. Grandparents, she repeated, almost testing the word. Are they nice? Daniel smiled. They sounded like good people. Kind. They want to see you. Her lips trembled. But I can't see them. You will, he said softly. You're healing Lena, and they'll love you no matter what. Her small hands tightened around Shadow's collar. Will Shadow come too? Daniel looked down at the dog, loyal, unmoving eyes locked on him like he already knew the question. Yeah, Daniel whispered. He'll be right there. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Daniel sat awake outside the tent, cigarette burning low between his fingers, the desert stretching silent before him. Marcus sat beside him, both men lost in thought. You ever think God lines things up in ways we don't understand? Marcus asked. Daniel nodded. Every day. You sure you can let her go? Daniel exhaled smoke, watching it vanish into the night. It's not about letting go. It's about keeping a promise and giving her a chance to live. From inside the tent came the faint sound of a child's laughter, Lena's voice light and fleeting, carried by the wind as Shadow shifted and huffed beside her. Marcus smiled faintly. Sounds like she's already started. Daniel looked toward the stars where Cody Turner's name lived now, somewhere beyond the reach of radio or reason. I'll get her home, brother, he said quietly. I swear it. The desert highway between Gallup and Taos stretched like a ribbon of dust beneath an endless blue sky. For miles, the only company was wind tumbleweed and the soft hum of the old Jeep's engine. Daniel Hayes drove with steady hands, eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind tangled between hope and hesitation. In the back seat, Lena sat buckled beside Shadow. Her small fingers traced the edges of the window glass, following the vibration of the wind outside. Though she couldn't see the vast mesas or the golden light pouring over them, she tilted her head as if she could feel their beauty. Her other hand rested gently on Shadow's back. The dog's calm breathing anchored her. Marcus Reed rode in the passenger seat, hat pulled low against the glare. We should hit Taos by sundown, he said, glancing back at Lena. She doing all right? Daniel looked in the mirror. Yeah, she's quiet. Marcus smiled faintly. Quiet's better than terrified. Daniel nodded, his chest tightening. She's braver than she knows. When the first outlines of Taos appeared, adobe houses, weathered barns, and distant cottonwoods, the air seemed to change. The light softened, warmer somehow, the way it only gets in old New Mexico towns where time moves slower. They passed roadside crosses and wind-worn shrines, each one a reminder of prayers whispered and losses carried. By the time they reached the Turner property, the sun was dipping low. The house stood at the edge of a wide valley, its stucco walls painted the color of sand and clay. A small orchard stretched behind it, and a wooden fence leaned tiredly under years of wind. An elderly man was waiting on the porch. Walter Turner stood tall despite his years-long frame, silver hair curling over his ears, his hands stained faintly with paint. Beside him, June Turner, shorter and rounder, clutched a folded cloth against her chest. Her eyes, bright and trembling, searched the horizon until she saw the approaching Jeep. When Daniel stopped the engine, silence filled the space between them, heavy and sacred. June took a step forward. Her voice shook. Is that her? Daniel opened the back door. Yes, ma'am. Lena turned her head toward the unfamiliar voices, instinctively pressing closer to Shadow. The shepherd stood first, then looked up at Daniel as if asking for permission. Daniel nodded once. The dog jumped down gently, then turned, waiting for Lena. Easy, sweetheart, Daniel said softly, helping her down. We're here. The ground felt strange beneath her feet, soft, uneven, alive with the smell of grass and old wood. She held Shadow's collar tightly, her other hand reaching for the air in front of her. Walter stepped forward, voice trembling. Lena, honey, it's Grandpa. She froze. That word, Grandpa, felt unfamiliar and yet warm. He stopped a few feet away, hands open. You don't have to come close, he said softly. I just want you to know you're safe. We've been waiting a long time. June's tears spilled as she knelt down with difficulty, holding the folded cloth out toward Lena. I made cookies, she said. Cody used to love them. Maybe you will too. The smell drifted through the air, cinnamon and butter, simple and sweet. Lena hesitated. Then slowly she reached out. Her fingers brushed June's hand. Warm, real. Shadow gave a soft huff as if to say, "It's all right." Lena took the cookie and held it close, sniffing it like something fragile. "Thank you," she whispered. June let out a sob that turned into laughter. "You're welcome, baby." Inside the Turner house, everything smelled of wood polish and bread. The walls were lined with paintings, landscapes of canyons, fields, and one portrait that made Daniel stop in his tracks. It was Cody Turner smiling in uniform, his arm around a young woman with sunlight in her hair. June noticed Daniel's gaze. "That was taken the week before he left," she said quietly. "We never stopped waiting for news. When we lost Anna too, I thought God had forgotten us." Daniel shook his head. "He didn't forget." June touched his arm gently. "No," she said through tears. "He sent you." Lena sat at the kitchen table sipping warm milk. Shadow lay beside her, his head resting near her feet. Walter sat across from her, hands folded tightly, afraid to move too fast or too close. "Can you see us at all?" he asked gently. Lena shook her head. "Not yet. It's just light and dark." He nodded, voice breaking. "That's all right. You'll see soon." June set a plate of cookies in front of her. "Your daddy loved these so much he used to sneak them before dinner." Lena smiled faintly. "Mama said he wasn't supposed to." June froze. "You remember her?" Lena nodded. She had long hair, and she sang when she cooked. Walter covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed by the flood of memory. June reached across the table, taking Lena's hand. "You're home, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're really home." Shadow lifted his head, sensing the change in the air, then pressed his body against Lena's legs. It was his way of confirming what the adults could barely speak. "You're safe now." That evening, Daniel and Marcus stepped outside, standing under the porch light as dusk turned purple over the valley. "You did good, brother," Marcus said. "You kept your promise." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked through the window where Lena sat between her grandparents, June brushing her hair with slow, gentle strokes. The dog lay at her feet, utterly content. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly, "but it doesn't feel like the end. It feels like the start of something bigger." Marcus smiled. "Maybe it's both." Later that night, after the dishes were done and the old house had fallen into a calm hush, Daniel checked on Lena one last time. She lay curled under a quilt on the couch, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Shadow was stretched out beside her head on his paws, eyes half open. Daniel crouched down and whispered, "How you doing, kiddo?" She smiled sleepily. "It's nice here. It smells like cookies." He chuckled. "That's how you know you're home. Will you stay?" "I can't, sweetheart. Not tonight. But I'll come back soon." Her small hand reached out until it found his sleeve. "You promise?" He swallowed. "I promise." As he stood to leave, she spoke again. "Thank you for finding me." Daniel paused by the door. "You found us too, Lena." Outside, the stars had returned endless and brilliant over the New Mexico plains. Marcus waited by the Jeep, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "She asleep?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." They stood in silence for a moment, both watching the farmhouse, the faint light from the window flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. "She'll be all right," Marcus said. "Yeah," Daniel replied softly. "She's got what she needs now. Faith." Daniel smiled faintly. "And family." The desert wind picked up again, brushing over the fields, carrying the scent of sage and cinnamon into the night. Daniel closed his eyes and thought of Cody, the man who had saved his life, the friend who had trusted him with the most precious thing he had. "Rest easy, brother," he whispered into the wind. "Your little girl's home." Spring in Taos had come early that year. The snowmelt trickled down from the mountains, feeding the cottonwoods that framed the Turner property. The air smelled of cedar and wet earth. Every morning the light came earlier, soft and golden, slipping gently through the curtains of the old house like a promise. 3 months had passed since Lena Turner came home. Her world had begun to change slowly, like dawn creeping over a dark horizon. The doctors from Santa Fe visited twice a month, bringing new hope with every test. Her eyes, once clouded and dull, now reacted faintly to light. The treatments, drops, compresses, exercises were helping. But it wasn't medicine alone that healed her. It was love, patience, and a loyal dog who never left her side. Shadow. The German Shepherd had become her constant companion, her eyes, her comfort, her quiet guardian. Wherever Lena went, Shadow followed. When she practiced walking outside, he trotted close enough for her to brush his back with her hand. When she stumbled, he stopped steady as stone, letting her catch herself. At night, he slept beside her bed, his breath deep and reassuring. To Lena, Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was safety itself. On one bright morning, Clara Reed arrived from Santa Fe to check on Lena's progress. She parked her old blue pickup by the fence and walked up the gravel path, her stethoscope swinging gently at her neck. June met her on the porch, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. "You're early," she said, smiling. "Coffee's still brewing?" "I'll take it black," Clara replied with a grin. "How's our girl?" June's smile softened. "Stronger. She helps me knead dough now. Still won't let that dog out of her sight." Clara chuckled. "That sounds about right." Inside, the house smelled of bread and sunlight. Lena sat by the window with a coloring book spread open, a faint halo of light touching her dark hair. She couldn't see the colors yet, but she liked the feel of the paper beneath her fingers. Shadow lay beside her, one paw gently resting across her foot, as if to say, "I'm here." When Clara approached, Lena smiled. "Hi, Miss Clara." "Hi, sweetheart," Clara said, kneeling down beside her. "How are your eyes feeling today?" "They don't hurt as much," Lena said. "Sometimes I see shapes, just shadows." "Well," Clara said, glancing at the dog, "you've got the right name for that." Lena laughed softly. "He's my shadow." Clara smiled and checked her eyes with a small penlight. "Look up, honey. That's it. Follow the light." Lena blinked, squinting slightly. "It's bright," she murmured. "That's good. Bright means your eyes are trying to remember." June stood in the doorway, hands clasped, whispering a prayer she didn't quite finish. The weeks that followed brought more signs of change. Lena began recognizing movement, the flutter of June's apron, the sway of curtains, the flicker of a candle. One evening, she startled everyone when she pointed toward the window and whispered, "The sun's orange." June froze mid-step. "You can see it. Just the color," Lena said, voice trembling. "It looks like fire, but not scary." Walter had to leave the room for a moment, pretending to fetch something because his eyes had filled with tears. Then one morning the miracle happened. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of birds outside. The clock ticked softly in the kitchen. A thin veil of dawn light spilled across Lena's bed, golden and new. Lena stirred beneath her blanket. Shadow lay curled beside her, as always, his steady breath matching hers. She yawned, rubbed her eyes, and blinked. Something was different. The light, it wasn't just light anymore. It had form, depth, texture. She blinked again, heart pounding. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the blur, the edge of the quilt, the wooden chest at the foot of her bed, and then movement. A shadow shifted beside her. Her breath caught. "Shadow," she whispered. The figure stirred, tail thumping once, twice. She blinked again, and this time it wasn't just a blur. It was him. Brown and black fur streaked with silver, upright ears, amber eyes deep and gentle, watching her as if he already knew what had happened. She gasped. Tears filled her eyes as she reached out a trembling hand. "I can see you." Shadow stood and placed one paw on her arm, pressing softly. It wasn't a command or reassurance, it was connection. She laughed through her tears, touching his face, tracing the line of his snout, the rough fur around his neck. "You're real," she whispered. "You're really here." Walter, hearing the sound of her laughter, hurried in from the porch. "Lena, are you all right?" She turned toward his voice, blinking rapidly. "Grandpa," she said, "I can see you. Not clear yet, but I see you." Walter froze, his weathered hands trembling as he reached for her. "Say that again." "I can see," she cried, her voice breaking into laughter. "I can see." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. June rushed in next, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knelt beside them, kissing Lena's hair over and over. "Oh, thank you, Lord," she whispered. "Thank you." Shadow pressed against them, tail wagging, whining softly as if to join in the joy. It was as though he'd known all along that this day would come. He'd waited patiently for her eyes to find him again. Later that morning, Clara arrived and found the household alive with quiet celebration. June was baking cinnamon rolls. Walter was out back painting for the first time in years, a sunrise bright and endless. And Lena sat on the porch steps with Shadow squinting at the world she had only felt before. She turned toward Clara's voice as she approached. "I can see you a little," she said, smiling. "Your shirt's blue." Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. "You're right. Bright blue. The color of sky." Lena tilted her head back, gazing at the heavens, though her vision was still fuzzy. "It's beautiful." "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said softly. "It always was. You just needed time to see it." That night, after the excitement had quieted, Daniel Hayes arrived unexpectedly. His Jeep pulled up the gravel drive as twilight deepened, headlights flickering against the old gate. He hadn't planned the visit. Something in his chest had simply told him it was time. When he stepped onto the porch, Lena looked up. For the first time, she didn't just recognize his voice, she saw him. Her eyes widened. "Uncle Daniel!" He smiled, stunned by the light in her face. "Hey, kiddo. You look tall," she said, grinning. He laughed, kneeling down. "That's the first time anyone's called me that." She reached out, touching his cheek with small, careful fingers. "I remember your voice, but now I know your face." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm just glad you can see it." She pointed toward Shadow, who sat nearby, alert and calm. "He was the first thing I saw." Daniel nodded, blinking back tears. "Then God gave you perfect vision." Lena leaned against the shepherd, hugging his neck. "He never left me. Not once." Daniel smiled softly. "That's what loyalty looks like, sweetheart. The kind that never gives up." Later, when the stars came out, Daniel stood by the fence with Walter, the two men looking toward the horizon. The night was clear, the sky deep and endless. "She's got her father's eyes," Walter said quietly. "Strong kind, full of wonder." Daniel nodded. "She's got his heart, too." Walter looked at him. "And she's got you to thank for all this." Daniel shook his head. "No, sir. She had faith. And that dog, he led her out of the dark." Walter smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what faith looks like, a shepherd who stays until the light returns." Daniel's gaze drifted toward the porch where Lena sat between June and Shadow, her laughter rising softly into the night air. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe that's exactly what it is." Summer arrived softly in Taos, the kind of season that seemed to linger more in feeling than in temperature, warm breezes carrying the scent of pine resin, distant thunder rolling off the mountains in the evenings, and sunlight that turned every dust mote into a floating spark. It had been nearly a year since Lena Turner regained her sight. And though her vision was still tender, sometimes blurry at dusk, sometimes overwhelmed by brightness, her world had opened wider than she ever dreamed possible. She'd begun to move with quiet confidence now. Where once she needed to hold Shadow's collar to walk, she now ran barefoot across the yard, laughter echoing through the orchard. Shadow, loyal as ever, chased after her in wide arcs, barking only once, not to warn, but to celebrate. From the porch, June Turner often paused her knitting to watch them. She'd smile at the sight of her granddaughter twirling in the sunlight, her dark hair catching the gold of late afternoon. "Look at that," she'd whisper. "A year ago she couldn't see a thing, and now she runs like she's been waiting her whole life to fly." Beside her, Walter Turner would nod, his paint-stained fingers gripping a coffee cup. "God gives the best miracles quietly," he'd say. "You just have to look close enough to notice." Captain Daniel Hayes kept his promise. He visited once a month, sometimes more, driving the same old Jeep up the winding road from the south. Each time, the shepherd would sense him long before anyone else did. Shadow would stand by the fence, ears pricked, tail swaying, eyes fixed on the road until the sound of tires met gravel. Lena always came running. The moment Daniel stepped out, she'd wrap her arms around him, not the shy girl he'd first met, but a child who'd found her strength. He always laughed, lifting her off the ground, though his own eyes sometimes shone more than he wanted to admit. "Uncle Daniel, guess what?" she'd say, nearly breathless. And every visit began the same way, a flood of stories about new things she'd learned, how she could bake cookies without burning them, how she'd drawn a sunset from memory, how Shadow had learned to open the screen door with his nose. Daniel listened to every word. He never rushed her. He just sat with her in the yard, hands folded, smile soft, the kind of listener every child needs at least once in their life. In late July, Marcus Reed arrived with a surprise. He'd been reassigned to a post closer to Santa Fe and decided to drive up for the weekend, bringing along his sister Clara. They arrived just as the evening light began to fade, their truck loaded with supplies and laughter. When Lena saw Clara step out, she ran to her with open arms. "Miss Clara," she cried. "You helped me see," Clara laughed, hugging her tightly. "You did the hard part, sweetheart. I just brought the drops." Then she looked down at Shadow, who sat beside them, tail thumping proudly. "And you," she said, scratching his ear, "you're still on duty, aren't you?" Shadow huffed softly, pressing his head against her hand. That evening, the Turners hosted what June called a summer supper. The long wooden table was set under the cottonwood trees, lit by string lights that Walter had hung between the branches. Plates of roasted corn beans, biscuits, and warm peach cobbler filled the table. The air buzzed with crickets and soft laughter. Daniel sat beside Walter, both men quietly watching the others. Marcus teased Clara about her driving. June insisted everyone have seconds. And Lena, glowing under the lights, told a story about Shadow chasing off a raccoon that had been stealing peaches from the orchard. When her story ended, the laughter faded into that kind of silence that wasn't empty, the kind filled with gratitude. Daniel caught Walter's eye and nodded as if to say, "You did it." Walter smiled back. "No," his eyes seemed to reply, "we all did." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The moon hung low, bright enough to paint the hills silver. Shadow lay nearby, eyes half closed, head resting between his paws. "You're slowing down, old boy," Daniel murmured. Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't move. His fur had grown grayer around the muzzle and his steps had lost some of their spring, but his eyes, those amber eyes, still held the same fierce devotion. "You've done your job," Daniel said softly. "You got her home. You kept your promise to him. And maybe you saved me too." The dog gave a low, rumbling sigh, a sound halfway between a growl and a purr, and laid his head against Daniel's boot. From inside the house came the faint sound of Lena's laughter mingled with June's voice reading her a story. Daniel looked up at the stars and let the sound settle deep in his chest. It felt like peace, something he hadn't known in years. By autumn, the valley had changed again. The orchards turned gold, the air crisp and thin. Lena started school, a small one-room building in town. June packed her lunches with care, apple slices, sandwiches, and a note that always ended with "Love you to the moon." Shadow accompanied her every morning. The children adored him, the teachers tolerated him, and Lena refused to go without him. "He listens better than most students," she'd joke, earning a soft chuckle from her teacher, Miss Elena Bryce, who had once grown up in foster care, and recognized something familiar in Lena's quiet resilience. In class, Lena's drawings became small miracles. She painted things no one had shown her: deserts, oceans, mountain skies. "How do you know what the sea looks like?" Miss Bryce once asked. Lena smiled. "I see it in the way the wind moves. That winter the snow came late. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon. Daniel visited on Christmas Eve, bringing gifts wrapped in newspaper and tied with twine, a hand-carved wooden box for June, new paintbrushes for Walter, and for Lena, a sketchbook bound in soft brown leather. She ran her fingers over it reverently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "For your stories. The ones you'll tell when you're older." Lena looked up at him. "You think I'll have stories worth telling?" He crouched down so their eyes met. "You already do, sweetheart. You just have to keep living them." Shadow rested his head on her lap, eyes closing as the firelight danced across his fur. In the quiet that followed, the family gathered around the fireplace. Snow began to fall outside, light, soft, unhurried. Walter hummed an old hymn, June leaned her head against his shoulder, and Lena drew shapes in her new sketchbook by firelight. Daniel sat back, listening, letting the warmth of the moment settle over him like a blanket. He thought about Cody again, his laughter, his promise, his sacrifice. And as the fire cracked softly, Daniel whispered into the glow, "You can rest easy now, brother. She's happy. She's home. As the night deepened, Lena set her sketchbook aside and crawled to Shadow's side. She lay beside him, resting her head against his flank. His breathing was slow, steady, a lullaby she'd known since the ruins. "Good night, Shadow," she murmured. "Don't worry, I'll take care of you now." The shepherd opened one eye, looked at her and thumped his tail once before drifting back to sleep. And outside, under a sky filled with snow and starlight, the Turner farmhouse stood quietly, a small circle of warmth in a wide, cold world. Inside it, the broken had been made whole again. 2 years had passed since the miracle of Lena Turner's sight. The seasons had turned and returned again, each one softer than the last, like the world itself was learning to breathe easier. The Turner home in Taos had settled into a rhythm of peace school days, laughter, bread baking in the oven, and evenings spent painting sunsets that never looked quite the same twice. But 300 miles away at the quiet military outpost near Gallup, another rhythm had begun to fade. Shadow was slowing down. He still followed Captain Daniel Hayes wherever he went, down the hallways, across the training field, into the Jeep for early patrols, but his movements had grown measured, deliberate. His once smooth stride now carried a faint stiffness, especially in the mornings. His muzzle had turned gray, his eyes softer, like 2 amber lamps dimmed by time. Daniel noticed everything. He saw the way Shadow hesitated at the steps, the way he sometimes lay awake at night, ears twitching at sounds far beyond the desert horizon. The old shepherd's body was here, but his heart, Daniel could tell, was somewhere else. One evening, after a long day of inventory reports, Daniel sat on the back steps of the outpost, the desert wind rolling cool across the sand. The sun dipped behind the red mesas, painting the sky with streaks of copper and blue. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his front paws. His breathing was steady, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something unseen. Daniel rubbed the dog's neck gently. "You miss her, don't you?" Shadow's tail moved once, slow, thoughtful. Then he lifted his head, sniffing the wind. Daniel followed his gaze. Out there beyond the wide stretch of desert, past the mountains and rivers, was Taos, the only other place Shadow had ever truly called home. "You've done your job, buddy," Daniel murmured. "You've earned some rest." Shadow didn't look away. His ears twitched forward, his breath shallow. And for the first time in years, Daniel saw a flicker of impatience in those old eyes, a restless pull toward something more than routine, something waiting. Daniel exhaled. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go see her." 2 days later, before dawn, the Jeep's headlights cut through the cool dark. The desert stretched ahead, endless and still. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his head high despite his age, ears pricked toward the rising light. The soft hum of the engine filled the silence between them. Daniel drove slow, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Shadow's back. The miles rolled by like chapters. Sage fields, sandstone cliffs, the long, lonely roads of northern New Mexico. He thought of the years that had passed, of Lena's first laugh, her first drawing, the way she'd said, "I can see you," with tears in her eyes. He thought of Cody Turner, too, his old friend, the one whose courage had started it all. And now it felt like every road was leading back to one place, one purpose. By late afternoon, the Jeep turned down the gravel path leading to the Turner home. The old cottonwoods swayed gently in the breeze. The porch light was already on, even though the sun was still lingering behind the mountains. When Daniel cut the engine, the sound of barking echoed from the yard, higher pitched, younger. A moment later, the front door swung open and Lena appeared, now 10 years old, taller hair braided over one shoulder, her blue-gray eyes clear as a New Mexico sky. "Uncle Daniel," she shouted, running across the yard. Daniel smiled. "Hey, kiddo." Then she saw the passenger seat. Her breath caught. Shadow. The old shepherd lifted his head slowly, tail thumping weakly against the seat. The moment she called his name, a spark returned to his eyes, a memory reignited. Lena's laughter broke into tears as she flung open the door. "Shadow, you came." He stepped down carefully, stiff but proud, and when his paws touched the dirt, he gave a soft, low bark, the kind that once meant mission complete. Lena dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. "You remember me," she whispered. Daniel's voice was thick. He never forgot. That evening, the Turner house glowed with warmth. June cooked a full supper: roast chicken, biscuits, and peach cobbler for company. Walter poured coffee for Daniel and sat with him on the porch while Lena lay on the floor inside her head, resting against Shadow's side as he slept. "She's been asking about him for months," Walter said softly. "Said she dreams about the sound of his paws." Daniel nodded. "He's been restless lately. Couldn't sleep. Would just stare toward the east. I think he was trying to tell me it was time." Walter looked through the window toward the two of them. Maybe he just wanted to come home. Daniel smiled faintly. Yeah, maybe he did. Later that night, Lena found Daniel sitting by the back steps under the stars. She carried a blanket around her shoulders, her hair messy from tears and laughter. "He's asleep," she said softly. "He snores." Daniel chuckled. "He's earned it." She sat beside him silent for a while. Then she whispered, "He's slower now." Daniel nodded. "He's getting older. Dogs live their years fast, but they fill them with more love than most people do in a lifetime." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Is he gonna go away soon?" Daniel swallowed the question, heavy in the cool night air. "Someday," he said gently, "but not tonight. Not while he's got you." She leaned her head against his arm. "Can he stay? Forever?" Daniel turned his gaze toward the dark horizon. "That's why we came, sweetheart. I was hoping your grandparents would agree." She lifted her head. "You mean he can live here?" He smiled. "If it's all right with them, yeah. He's earned a home where he's loved." Lena threw her arms around him. "Thank you, Uncle Daniel." He hugged her back, his voice breaking slightly. "No, Lena. Thank you. You gave him something to live for." When morning came, the air smelled of fresh rain and sage. Lena woke early to find Shadow already sitting by the porch, staring toward the sunrise. She sat beside him, her small hand resting on his back. "You found me when I couldn't see," she whispered. "Now I'll take care of you." Shadow turned his head slightly, his amber eyes reflecting the dawn. His tail moved once, soft and slow. He didn't need words, the moment was enough. Inside, Daniel was packing his duffel bag. June met him at the doorway. "You sure about leaving him here?" she asked. He smiled. "Yeah, this is where he belongs." June touched his arm. "You've got a good heart, Captain." Daniel looked out the window, watching Lena laugh as Shadow tried to follow her down the steps. "That dog did all the saving," he said quietly. "I just drove the Jeep." Walter joined them, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "We'll take care of him. You can visit any time." "I will," Daniel said. "But I think he'll be too busy for me now." As Daniel started the Jeep, Lena ran over barefoot, her braids swinging behind her. She pressed her face against his arm. "You'll come back right. Always," he said. "And you take care of that old boy for me." She nodded firmly. "I promise." Shadow stood beside her tail, brushing her leg, watching Daniel the same way he had all those years, calm, loyal, unspoken understanding. "Goodbye, partner," Daniel whispered. "You did your duty. Now rest." He raised a hand in salute. The dog's ears twitched a soldier's acknowledgement, and then he turned, following Lena back toward the porch. Daniel drove away slowly, watching through the mirror as the figures grew smaller, a girl and a shepherd standing together in the soft morning light. And for the first time in a long while, the ache in his chest felt lighter. He'd kept his promise, and so had Shadow. The years that followed were slow and golden, unfolding like pages of a story too sacred to rush. The Turner home, once shadowed by loss, had become a place of peace. Time had softened its edges, turning pain into memory and memory into gratitude. Lena Turner was 12 now, tall for her age, with long dark hair and eyes as bright as the New Mexico sky after rain. The faint gray in her pupils was still there, a ghost of the darkness she'd once known, but she never hid it. When people asked, she'd just smile and say, "I see fine. I just learned to see with my heart first." Shadow was slower now, his steps measured and heavy with the weight of years. His fur had faded to silver around his muzzle and ears. His back leg, once injured, stiffened in the cold. But he was still her Shadow, still following her from room to room, still resting by the porch when she painted, still waiting every morning at her door, as if his watch was never done. Every afternoon after school, Lena would sit outside with her sketchbook and paints. The valley stretched wide before her, the same valley where she'd once felt her way through darkness. Now she painted it in full color, gold fields, red canyons, blue skies so wide they felt endless. But her favorite subject was always the same, the old German shepherd by her feet. Sometimes she'd draw him standing strong in his prime, other times lying in the sun, half asleep. She never drew him perfectly. She said the brush couldn't quite capture what she felt, but she always tried. And every time she finished, she whispered the same thing. "Thank you." One late autumn evening, she sat on the porch steps, a half-finished canvas before her. The air smelled of cedar smoke and the first hint of snow. The world was quiet except for the rhythmic scratch of her brush. Shadow lay beside her, his breathing deep, his eyes half closed. "You know, old boy," she said softly, "I think you're part of every color I paint." The dog's ear twitched. "You were there when I couldn't see," she continued. "You didn't care that I was broken. You just stayed." She dipped her brush into the gold paint, spreading it across the canvas like sunlight. "I think that's what faith is, staying beside someone even when they can't see the way." Shadow shifted slightly, resting his chin on her foot. His eyes met hers, cloudy now, but still full of warmth. For a moment it felt like they both understood the same language, the kind spoken without words. Inside, June baked bread, humming softly while Walter painted by lamplight in his studio. His newest piece was of Lena and Shadow, the girl with her hand on the dog's back, both facing the horizon. "It's not about sight," he said when June looked over his shoulder. "It's about trust." She smiled. "That's what love looks like." That winter a storm rolled through the valley. Snow piled high against the fences, and the air turned so cold that the stars themselves seemed to shiver. The Turner house stayed warm, wood burning in the stove, soup simmering on the stove, laughter echoing through the halls. But Shadow began to struggle. His joints stiffened. His breathing came slower at night. He still insisted on following Lena everywhere, though sometimes he'd pause halfway up the stairs and rest, tail wagging faintly as if to say, "I'm coming, just give me a minute." Lena knew. She didn't speak it aloud, but she knew. One night she sat beside him by the fireplace. The room glowed soft and amber. Outside the snow fell thick and soundless. She brushed his fur gently. "You're tired, huh?" Shadow's eyes flicked toward her, calm and accepting. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can rest soon. You did everything you had to. You found me." Her tears fell silently, dripping onto his fur. "I used to think God sent you to save me," she said. "But maybe he sent me to help you rest." Shadow gave a soft, low sigh, the kind that spoke of peace, not pain. His tail moved once, slow, grateful. The following morning, the first light broke through the snow clouds, flooding the valley in gold. When Lena stepped outside, the world was still the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. Shadow lay by the porch, his head resting on his paws, eyes closed. The wind brushed gently through his fur, lifting the last flakes of snow. His body was still, but his expression was calm, almost smiling. Lena knelt beside him, her breath catching in the cold air. She didn't cry at first. She just pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Good boy, thank you." Her grandparents found her there a few minutes later. Her small frame wrapped in the blanket Walter draped over her shoulders, her hand still resting on the shepherd's back. Walter carried the old dog to the orchard where the earth was soft beneath the apple trees. Together they buried him under the largest one, the one that bloomed first every spring. Lena placed her teddy bear's ribbon around a small wooden cross Walter carved. On it he etched two simple words, "Faithful friend." In the days that followed, the house felt quieter. Lena still painted, but she left an empty spot at her feet where Shadow used to lie. June noticed she'd begun drawing light differently now, softer, warmer, like something alive. One evening, Daniel Hayes returned. When he heard the news, he removed his cap, standing silent by the orchard. He was one of the best, he said quietly. Never failed a mission. Lena stood beside him, holding her sketchbook. "He finished his last one," she whispered. "He made sure I could see." Daniel looked down at her, eyes glistening. "He'd be proud of you, Lena." She opened her sketchbook and showed him a painting, the one she'd finished that very morning. It showed a girl standing in a field of light, her hand resting on the neck of a German shepherd who looked out toward the sunrise. Beneath it, she'd written in neat, careful letters, "He guided me when I couldn't see, and stayed until I could." Daniel couldn't speak for a moment. He just nodded, his jaw, tightening, eyes wet. "You keep painting, sweetheart," he said finally. "That's how you keep him close." Lena smiled through her tears. "He's not gone, Uncle Daniel. He's everywhere I look now." Years later, that painting would hang in a small art exhibit in Santa Fe, part of a collection called Through the Eyes of Faith. Critics would praise the color, the light, the emotion, but those who knew the story, the real story, would stand quietly before that one piece, letting their hearts do the remembering. Because it wasn't just a painting of a dog and a child. It was a story of grace, of how love waits, heals, and teaches us to see. And for Lena, it wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything she would ever understand about faith. 15 years later, the desert looked almost the same. The same dry winds brushed over the mesas near Gallup, the same distant hum of freight trains carried across the plains. But for Captain Daniel Hayes, standing at the edge of the empty outpost, everything felt different. Time had peeled away the noise and rush of duty, leaving behind only what truly mattered: memory and meaning. He was retired now, gray at the temples, his face mapped with sun and years. The base had long been decommissioned, its tents replaced by scrub and sage. Yet he still came here once a year, not to mourn, but to remember. In his hand he held a small envelope addressed in careful handwriting to Uncle Daniel from Lena Turner. It had arrived 2 weeks earlier, forwarded through an old unit contact. Inside had been a letter folded neatly, and something else, a photograph. He sat on the tailgate of his Jeep, the desert wind tugging gently at his jacket, and began to read. "Dear Uncle Daniel, I hope this letter finds you somewhere quiet, maybe out where the wind still smells like sage and sunlight. It's been many years since you found me in that old ruin, and I wanted you to know that your promise and shadows still lives on. I grew up, Uncle Daniel. I finished school, and now I teach art to children who can't see. We call our little program The Light We Share. Every time I guide a child's hand across a blank page, I remember how shadow once guided me across a world I couldn't see. My eyes are healed now. I can see color, faces, sunlight. But the truth is, I learned to see long before that, because you and Shadow taught me what love looks like when it doesn't need words. I still live in Taos. The old apple tree blooms every spring, and I always sit beneath it with my sketchbook. Sometimes the wind feels like his breath beside me. I think that's God's way of reminding me that love never leaves. It just changes shape. You once said faith isn't about seeing, but walking forward, even when you can't. You were right. And I've been walking forward ever since, one painting, one child, one quiet miracle at a time. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying, for me, for him, for everything. With love, Lena.